We are live. You are live. You're looking live. Charlie Marlow, the great Eric Messersmith. This is everybody settle down. Eric, I can already tell this is going to be a show where I'm going to have to clear my throat 47,000 times because I can feel it. So hold on. Okay. Hopefully that's the end of it. I don't think it will be. But how you doing, buddy? What's up?
You know, doing well, Chuck. We are under 2 weeks to go. We're in the home stretch now officially.
Yes, we are. So let's break it all down. First of all, let's just start with the latest, the scores and odds, as we like to say. Polls, odds. We got Nate Silver just came out. We always talk about the election betting odds. We have RealClearPolitics. What are you seeing? What are you thinking?
Well, election betting odds are generally 60-40, Trump in that range. If you go to electionbettingodds.com, the polling averages would lead you to think it's closer than that, closer to 50-50, but probably still with a Trump edge. I mean, Nate Silver, the Silver Bulletin, a lot of the other polling forecasts, The Hill, they have Trump with the advantage, but it's in the low 50s, 52-48, 53-47, something like that. Look, I don't think there's any question the trend in the last 2 weeks is pro-Trump. He has the momentum. Now, that doesn't mean the momentum will continue all the way to the election day. It may stop. It may reverse. Who knows? But look, as I'm sitting here today, I would rather be Trump. He's gotten good national polling in the last few days, which he hasn't had in a while. He's had several polls that have come out in the last few days that actually have him ahead in the popular vote. The Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Forbes. He had one last week from Fox News, Atlas Intel. Like multiple polls other than Rasmussen, which is kind of like the, house favorite poll for Trump that's had him ahead all year. Now there's actually other polls that say that. Now Harris is still ahead in the average, but that's come down. In fact, Nate Silver just put out his update for the forecast today. Her lead now in the national popular vote is 1.3. That's down from 2.5 a week ago. So Trump has essentially halved her lead in the last week. If that's accurate and she ends up only winning the popular vote by 1, it's almost impossible to imagine her winning the Electoral College. I mean, remember, Hillary Clinton won by 2 and lost the Electoral College. Joe Biden won by 4.5 and damn near lost the Electoral College. Came down to less than 100,000 votes in 3 states. So if she's 2 or less in the popular vote, she's in a world of trouble. So look, I don't know how you, sitting here 10 days out, based on the data we have, with the usual caveat that the polls can be wrong. They have been off in the past by enough to swing the election. There could be a polling error in Harris's favor. But given where we are now with the data we have, I think you'd rather be Trump at this point. I'm probably in that 60-40 range that Trump is the favorite. But I think, look, Harris still has, by all accounts, the better ground game. They've invested a lot more money on that, whereas Trump has outsourced his kind of get out the vote to Elon Musk and some of these super PACs that don't really have experience with it. So in a very close election, which this very well could be, that certainly could be the difference. Harris has raised $1 billion this year, so she has more cash on hand than Trump to spend over these last 10 days or so. And in the polling averages in Nate Silver's the Silver Bulletin, she's still ahead in Michigan and Wisconsin, albeit by less than a point. 0.5 in Wisconsin, 0.8 in Michigan. And in Pennsylvania, Trump is ahead by 0.2. So essentially a tie. And if she wins those 3 states, she will win. She will get 270 electoral votes exactly and be the president. So it's still there for Harris, but you can't deny the movement toward Trump over the last several weeks. It's not a giant move, but in a close race, I think it is enough to tilt it in his favor. And then you combine the fact of something we've talked about before. He overperformed his October polls in 16 and 20 by about 3 points, give or take. If he does anything close to that again, he's going to win.
Okay, so I was looking at RealClearPolitics right before we came on, and you mentioned this, but it was kind of surprising because if you ever go on RealClearPolitics, I'm talking to the viewers and listeners now, it's just kind of always funny because you would always see a bunch of blue, and then you'd see that red dot. And the red dot was always Rasmussen, right?
Right.
And so now I'll just show it to people here. So all that blue, and then the first red is Rasmussen, but then you have Forbes, Trump +2. So Rasmussen, Trump +3. CNBC, Trump +2. Wall Street Journal, Trump +3. And this is the most recent polling, and this is coming off the previous 5 polls were all for Harris. Emerson, Harris +1. USA Today, Harris +1. Ipsos, Harris +3. Tip, Harris +3. Morning Consult, Harris +4. I mean, that's a lot of red. And if this thing is close, as you said, Joe Biden won by 4.5 points popular vote, but still, if tens of thousands of votes changed in 3 states, Donald Trump would have won in 2020. And then the betting odds. It's funny because Kamala Harris had a good betting odds day yesterday. Sometimes I look at that betting odds, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I feel like if we get to election day and that freaking betting odds says 50-50, I'm just going to laugh just because sometimes I do think there's something to this is where you and I probably disagree. You're a Silver guy. I don't know if I'm still a Lichtman guy, but when he says polling is sports talk radio, I think there's something to that. So again, maybe we go into the election less than 2 weeks from now and Trump is still 60-40 or 58-42 or 57-43. But I'm going to laugh my ass off if we get to election day and all of these polls and all these odds say 50-50, which maybe they actually are 50-50. And I've seen Nate Silver argue with people on Twitter who are saying that they're trying to keep it close for clicks and all that. And again, I don't know what the truth is. We will see on election day. But then he also said something. He goes, look, if an election is truly 50-50, like this one may be, he goes, well, you're going to cross the 50-yard line several times each way, right? One week, Harris up 1. Next week, Trump up 1, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know. I think at some point, don't we have to, and again, we have to wait and see how it plays out. But I feel like at some point, we have to have some accountability in the polling industry when you know that 16, they screwed up. They didn't properly rate Trump. That happened again in 2020. In 2022, they didn't properly account for Democrats. There was no red wave. Maybe this is the year they get it right, Eric. But like also, it could be really slanted towards Kamala. She could win. It could be really slanted towards Trump, and he absolutely routs Kamala Harris. And honestly, I don't think any of those outcomes would really surprise me that much.
Well, look, the thing about polling is you have a record, and this is what Silver talks about. And to be fair to Alan Lichtman, who does a completely different thing, that's what he does too. It's out there. So there's a reputational harm to being wrong, right? As a pollster, you lose credibility in the ratings. And that's why these pollsters are rated. They're rated based on how accurate they have been in the past. And that's why something like New York Times Siena gets a ton of weight. It's not because the New York Times sponsors it. It's because that poll is very highly rated because it's been very good in the past. And when it comes out, it moves the markets. It moves the betting odds. But one thing Silver talks about, which I think is important, is there is a herding mentality with pollsters because, look, they're making judgment calls on some of these things, on the sample they're using, the way they weigh it. So his point is you have a tendency to discredit outliers or to not release outliers. And what he says is trust the pollsters who will release outliers because they're the ones who are giving you genuine results rather than trying to conform their results to be with everybody else. I think in terms of close, what do we mean by close? Like, I think the popular vote in this election will be fairly close, within 3 or 4 points, which that's a fairly close competitive election, right? But that doesn't mean the Electoral College will be close. And the reason for that is because we're talking about these states as if they're going to break in different ways, which is possible. But that's not usually what happens. In 16 and 20, those were fairly close elections, but almost all of the close states broke one way or the other. In 16, they broke for Trump. In 20, they almost all broke for Biden. And that is the most likely scenario, by the way. Nate Silver put this out. This is like a week old, but I think it's still pretty relevant. He put out the simulations. They do 40,000 simulations a day. So what is the probability that all the states, all 7 swing states break one way or the other? It's 25% they all break for Trump. That's pretty high. And it's 16% they all break for Harris. So that would be 41% of the time they all break the same way. No other scenario, by the way, with the swing states has more than 5%. No other mixing and matching of them. So that tells you, given how close it is, a tiny shift one way or the other is likely to break all 7 swing states for one candidate or the other. So let's say that happens. Are we then going to say, well, the election really wasn't close? No, both things can be true. It can be true that the election will be very close and competitive, but all or almost all of the swing states slightly break one way or the other. Those two things are not inconsistent. For me, for the polls to be quote unquote wrong at this point, one candidate or the other is going to have to win decisively. Like Trump would have to win the popular vote, right? Outright. Harris would have to win by 4, 5, 6 points. Then I think you could say, well, the polling was wrong. But anything else, I think is going to be in the general range of what the polling says, which is Harris slightly winning the popular vote and most of the swing states being really close. So I think it comes back to, what do you mean by wrong? And that's why I love the Nate Silver model more than somebody like Lichtman, because we live in a probabilistic world. Like Lichtman saying it's 100% chance Harris will win. Well, I think that's crazy. Like he essentially says the campaign, the candidates, the advertising, that means absolutely nothing. It's just a giant waste of time. They could literally do or say anything or nothing at all and would end up in the same place. And that's just ludicrous to me. Of course, there's always a chance. So the question is, where do you put it on the probabilistic frame? You know, people like 2016 even, they got it wrong, no doubt. Nate Silver got it wrong, quote unquote. He had Trump winning that election at 29%. That was way higher than a lot of other forecasters had, right? And so, for instance, if 2 forecasts come out and one in 2016 had Trump winning 1% of the time, which some of them did, they had Trump's chances like in the single digits, and Silver has him winning roughly 30% of the time. Well, you could say they're both wrong, right? Which is true. But there's a huge difference between saying something has a 1% chance of happening and a 30% chance of happening, right? And so I think that is the way, and that's the framework to look at it.
Yeah, you talk about probabilistic, which is a hard word to say. I saw another, basically it was I still call it Twitter, but it was an X thread, and it showed the map. What would happen if the polling was all right or wrong this way and that way? And when you said there's a pretty good chance probabilistically of all the swing states going one way, to me, it's obvious that there's a much higher chance for Trump, right? Like at this point, I do feel like the blue wall states are probably going to fall along the same lines, either Trump or Harris. I don't think all of the Sun Belt will. Like if you had to ask me right now what's going to happen, I think even if Trump gets 3 of those or 2, I think Harris gets 1. Now, maybe it's Nevada. Again, maybe I'm wrong and Trump gets all 7 of the swing states. But when you really start to break it down, I feel like less has to happen for Trump to win. You know what I'm saying? Like if Trump gets 1 of those, like he could literally win Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania by 26 votes, right? And he wins the election. Like, so that's where I feel like,
well, if he holds the Sun Belt, he wins.
Okay, but
because Harris could like Georgia or North Carolina would replace Michigan.
Okay,
and
but
Arizona would replace Wisconsin.
Right, but I feel like if Donald Trump wins one of the blue wall states, okay, this is just my opinion. If Donald Trump wins even one of the blue wall states, I feel like Donald Trump probably wins all of the Sun Belt. Is that crazy?
If he wins one of the blue wall, does he win all of the Sun Belt? Yeah, I think most likely. Right? Again, what's possible and what's most likely? I think that's most likely to happen because the averages consistently have shown Harris running better, not by much. We're talking about very small margins, sir, but running better in Michigan and Wisconsin than in the Sun Belt. So if she loses Michigan or Wisconsin, then I think it's very, very unlikely she wins the election because those have been better states for her. It's the same thing kind of in reverse for Trump. Trump's best state of the 7 swing states has been Arizona, slightly over Georgia. If he loses Arizona or Georgia, then I think it's very unlikely he wins the election because that probably means she wins the blue wall. But you have to remember, too, demographically, the Sun Belt and Rust Belt states are different in that the Rust Belt states are much less racially diverse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Arizona, ton of Hispanics, Georgia, large African American vote. They are whiter, right? So if Harris performs better than Biden with white college educated voters, which there's some evidence she is, than Biden did in 2020, then maybe she wins the Rust Belt, loses the Sun Belt, and ekes out a win. But let's say conversely, she doesn't do quite as well with white voters. Trump really runs up the margins in these blue wall states in the rural areas, like where I'm from, where there aren't a ton of, there's a lot of white, non-college educated people who give him huge margins. But let's say Harris turns out the black vote better than the polls show, and she does better with Hispanics than the polls are showing, which is very possible. You could then see a reverse where she loses 1 or 2 of the blue wall states, but wins 1 or 2 of the Sun Belt states. But again, history shows us they break together. So yeah, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with most of them breaking the same way, albeit very close. Earl Spence says the reason why Trump is closing Harris's lead on the popular vote is because he's performing well, and he's performing well in states like Florida, Texas, California, and New York. Maybe. I mean, look, there was a poll came out the other day that Harris was ahead by 20 in New York. She's been consistently ahead by 20, 25 in California. So I agree there has been some evidence that New York is swinging more red. Because remember, most of the popular vote advantage Democrats have is because they run up the margin so big in California, New York. Mm-hmm. Like Biden won by 7 million votes nationally. He won by 5 million just in California. Which, I mean, so 5 million of his 7 million vote margin came from California. So it is true. If Trump does better than he did in 2020 in New York and California, that will close the Electoral College popular vote gap, and it will be smaller. But if not, there's no reason to think it's going to change much. And the polling recently has Harris with nice leads in California and in New York, and it's fairly competitive in Texas and Florida. Like Trump's leads there are not huge. They're 5, 6, 7 points. So I disagree with Earl. I think the popular vote Electoral College split is going to be just as big as it was roughly in 16 and 20, which means Harris has to win this thing by, I would say, at least 2. Anything less than 2, and I think she's the underdog.
I just think the vibes of this election, though, they just fascinate me because I just am kind of flabbergasted by the betting odds changing so much in the last 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not saying that Trump isn't going to win, and I never thought that Kamala Harris was 100% going to win. Even if I thought Kamala Harris was going to win, let's say 55-45, obviously Trump has a good chance to win. But like when you kind of read more about Polymarket and basically what goes into it, I just wonder if after all of this, we're going to look at Polymarket and say it's total BS. The more I've kind of read about it, and by the way, apparently before the VP was announced, remember we used to look at the betting sites before all this. And I think the day before Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz, I think Josh Shapiro was like a 62% betting odds to win there. So that also just goes to show you, I mean, clearly they were wrong. I just find it weird, and I said this last week, so I'm kind of repeating myself, but like what's gone on the last 2 to 3 weeks, I just think it's an odd time for the odds to shift. I know Kamala Harris, she's done a bunch of interviews. She's been okay, not great, not terrible in my opinion. They're all doing all the podcasts. But for the betting odds to swing in Trump's favor, and flip like this after no real big events. I understand why the betting odds went in his favor after JD Vance beat Tim Walz in the debate. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, because I'll say this again. In my real life, when I go out in the world, I don't feel like the vibes have changed at all of this election. But on social media, and clearly I'm looking at polling too, but specifically on X, I feel like Republicans think they're going to win easy. And all you see is Dems in disarray, and you see the Democrats are in panic mode. I wonder what of that is true. And I really don't know the answer. That's why I'm so fascinated by what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, look, you and I, coming from sports backgrounds, we know that betting markets are not perfect. There are, I mean, the public sometimes will get on a team and drive up the price, and then the sharks, as they're called, will come in and bet the other way, and that will drive the line as well. And so the betting odds are far from perfect. And as you mentioned, there's particular concerns about maybe certain people trying to manipulate the betting odds, either because they're just overly enthusiastic for Trump or maybe on purpose. That's why Polymarket is only one market. That's why I like something like electionbettingodds.com that takes a bunch of markets together and kind of aggregates them. But even with that, it's certainly not, it's far from perfect. Let me say that. But I think the fact that it is matching up mostly with the forecast models, they're all Trump in the 50s, right? The betting markets may be 59 or 60. The election forecasting models may be in the low 50s, although a few of them still have Harris with a very slight lead. But I think part of it is there's not a big difference. I know it seems in our minds like if you say Harris has a 55-45 edge and then you go 55-45 Trump, that seems like a massive change because you're flipping the favorite. But it's really not. It's still a coin flip. It's just in our minds, we make it, we think, oh, that's a huge change, but it's not a huge change. Like if I told you there's a 45% chance of something happening tomorrow, and then I told you there's a 55% chance, that's basically the same thing. It's very close to a coin flip. So I think some of it is just our human beings, we struggle with probability, but I do agree with you that they're betting markets in America for elections is not a thing that's been around for a very long time. And in fact, some of these, I heard Mark Cuban say this the other day, that you can't even bet on some of these if you are an American citizen.
All of them except for, is it Cashy?
Is Cashy the only one? So these are foreign bets. Some of them, they're not even real money. They're people who are using like a monopoly type money within a, kind of a game format. So again, huge grain of salt with these, right? So what if the betting market showed Trump 60-40, but the polling showed Harris way ahead? I would go with the polling, right?
Yeah.
I would trust the polling more than the betting markets. But that's not really what's happening. The reason it's moved is because the polls have moved. Again, Trump in Silver's forecast, he's gone from down 2.5 nationally to down 1.2. That's not a huge move, but in a close race, that's enough to tilt it. And I just think there is this sense that when we're in these kind of lulls where we don't have major events, Trump has tended to do better. It comes back to kind of the fundamental gravitational pull of the race. What do you think that is? And I think it's right track. Only 2/3 of the country says we're on the wrong track. That's tough to the incumbent president's approval rating is in the low 40s, and his vice president is running for the nomination. I know, look, there's a lot of things going on, right? And you and I get in the weeds in a lot of things, and people we follow all the movements. And Trump said this about, Arnold Palmer's dick, and he said this about he went to serve fries at McDonald's, and Kamala Harris was on CNN, and John Kelly said Trump's a fascist. And we have all these news events that come up that are interesting that people talk about, Trump swaying to music for 40 minutes at a rally. But I don't know that any of those things fundamentally alter the basic framework of Trump is a challenger, even though he's a different kind of challenger because he's president. He is a challenger in a time when the incumbent administration is very unpopular. He's running against literally someone from that administration. 2/3 of the country say we're on the wrong track. And in democracies around the world, incumbent parties have been getting their asses kicked over the last few years. So that kind of goes back to the old Alan Lichtman model of it's tough to overcome the fundamentals. Although Lichtman, his fundamentals show a Harris win, despite, all that stuff I said.
Okay, couple things. First of all, I thought Trump making the joke about Arnold Palmer's CAC was actually funny, right? And this is where people that rip on Trump, again, they don't get it, where you always say the line, and it's well said. It's that Trumpers take Donald Trump. What is it? His opponents take him literally. What is it?
Yeah, it's his opponents take him literally but not seriously.
Right.
And his supporters take him seriously but not literally. And I think that explains basically all we need to know about Trump and his support.
Yeah, so I thought the Arnold Palmer joke was funny. And to see the outrage from the left, like, oh, in the closing weeks of a campaign, this is your message, Arnold Palmer's dick. And I'm like, come on, that's funny. And I'm not a Trump guy. The other thing, I saw this article, and this is where sometimes you don't know what's real. Is it the Babylon Bee or the Onion, or is it an actual article? So I was scrolling through X, and there was this article, and just so everybody knows, I don't even know if it was true or not, but it was like, in the end, was Joe Biden actually the better candidate over Kamala? And I started to laugh, but then I was thinking, I was like, again, I don't think that's true, by the way. I really don't. I really don't. I really don't. But like, I thought about it, and I'm like, well, I don't know if it's just these voters, for whatever reason, if these white working class voters in the blue wall states like Biden more than Kamala. Again, I bring that up half as a joke, but you said there's a lot going on. I have a prop here. Okay. So you can't exactly read this. This is what I got like 2 days ago for these rental properties that I have. And don't just look at it, people, like from a landlord's perspective. Also think about it as a homeowner. Okay. So real quick, I'll try to show it to you. This is for the next year, 2025. A 23% increase in the HOA. That's $74 per month for the largest condo unit in this huge complex that has like 500 units. Okay. The HOA per month is $396. I bring that up because, Eric, the HOA 2 years ago was $221. Wow. It went up like 23%, 2 straight years. So if you're paying $221, you're now paying $396. So think about it, first of all. And by the way, taxes have gone up, let's say $20 a month. Insurance has gone up, let's say $20 a month. Labor, materials, all have gone up. So you can look at this from both perspectives. If you're a landlord, well, you essentially have to raise your rent $215, $220 per month just to make the same amount of money. I know nobody feels sorry for landlords. I get it. But if you live there, and these units, you could have bought them over the last 5 years for anywhere, let's just say from, some of them were $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Maybe the nicest ones now get sold for $85,000, $90,000, whatever. So this is like the perfect type of first-time home purchase, right? For somebody, it's a condo. If you're that person, you can say, okay, my grocery bill, yeah, it's gone down from the peak of inflation. Okay, gas prices are down from the peak of inflation. But these people, if you own that, you're paying $250 essentially more per month just for HOA, taxes, and insurance. Like, it is getting hard to afford life for a lot of people. And that's where I think at the end of the day, this matters more than anything. And that's where, if Trump wins, in my opinion, that's the reason. Democrats suck on immigration. Yes. Donald Trump, in my opinion, tried to overturn the election. But some people at the end of the day are going to be like, I can't afford life. And I think in the end, pun intended, that could trump everything.
Yeah. Well, we have an affordability crisis in this country, and prices have gone up. Those percentages are way higher than the average, but the average is 20% for everything over 3 years. Now, under Trump's term, it was 8%. So prices go up. That's inflation. It's normal. But this period has been way above normal. I think for messaging purposes, to the extent messaging matters and campaigns matter, and unlike Alan Lichtman, I think they do matter in the margins, right? And this is a marginal race. This is why I think Harris has made a mistake over the last couple of weeks and focusing so much on Trump and his unfitness to serve and January 6th and trying to overturn the election, which I agree with all of those things. But the people like me who agree with those things, they're already with you. Remember, at this point in the race, we're talking about the registered voters in 7 states who haven't already voted, because millions of people in those 7 states have already voted. They're locked in through mail-in vote or early in person, and then in even smaller universe, who are really persuadable. So think about that. Those are the only people that matter. As Buzz points out, votes mean nothing in blue states. Same thing in red states. Same thing in even these toss-up states where they've already voted. The only people that matter now are the people who haven't voted in 7 states and are truly undecided. That's a tiny fraction of people. I don't think those people care that much about January 6th, about trying to overturn the election. They care about the things like you're talking about. And so, for instance, Harris is going to make one of her closing argument speech next week in D.C. on the ellipse, which is where Trump gave his speech on January 6th, where he said, you got to fight like hell or you won't have a democracy anymore, prior to the riot we saw.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, obviously, based on that location, I assume her pitch is going to focus very heavily on what Trump said that day in that spot and how much of a threat he is to democracy. Again, which I agree with. But I don't think that's the best strategy right now. I talked to a family member last night in Pennsylvania, the state that's going to decide it, who's a Trump supporter, who doesn't necessarily love Trump, but is like, people are hurting out there. They're struggling, and they don't care. And about January 6th, they don't care about how crazy he has been and could be in the future. And so I think you've got to fine-tune your message, if you're Harris, in these closing stretch, to really focus on those voters. And Harris has a message to those voters. She has a message. She could say on tax policy, his tax cuts skew largely to the rich. Mine don't go to the rich at all. They go to people who are opening a small business. They go to people who have a child with an expanded child tax credit. She talked last night in the CNN town hall about elder care through Medicare, the sandwich generation, people who are raising children but also have elderly relatives, and how hard that can be and how you can make that better. She has policies for these things, but and she can contrast those with Trump, but you have to make that argument. And there's only so much space. There's only so much time. There's only so much attention that people have. And I watched that CNN town hall last night, and we can get into the finer points of it. But one of my key takeaways to reinforce this point was actually after the town hall was over. John King interviewed 5 of the people that were at the town hall, several of which asked questions. These were all undecided voters. And to Harris's credit, she flipped 2 of the 5 to her. The other 3 remained undecided. But one of the people who was still undecided said, I don't care about these attacks on Trump. I don't even know who some of these people are, like General Kelly and the other people that say he's a fascist. I want to know, what will you do for me? And the other people kind of nodded their head and agreed. And so those are the people that's literally a microcosm, a sample of the people that are going to decide who the next president will be. And I just think from a tactical standpoint, the baggage about Trump is already out there. And I don't think any new baggage is going to come along that's going to fundamentally change people's minds. And so you've made that case. The people who agree with you are with you. How do you connect with that very small percentage of people that is still left in these swing states? That is the message I think Harris needs to close with. And that should be the lead in how she closes. And again, she has arguments to make there. But you have to sell that message.
Okay, John Reibold, who's been very prolific, he says, Charlie, I love watching you read comments in your head. So he can tell when I look down that I'm actually reading the comment in my head, even if I don't put it up there. Okay, couple things. First of all, on a comedic note, I was watching. So I watched the end of that town hall because I kind of forgot it was on. I was doing kids' bedtime stuff. I put it on. I saw the end. So I watched more of the post game than the actual town hall. First of all, I found it very funny. This is just something I focus on because I'm stupid. But they're interviewing those 5 people, Eric, There's a guy in the back pulling cable. Did you see that?
No.
There's like
a
as a person who worked in TV for 20 years, I was just laughing because there's a dude like pulling cable in the back while they're still on the air asking the undecided voters. I don't know if anybody saw that. I laugh at stupid things like that. Sometimes I also wonder if those people are plants, right? Like, here's the thing with independents, because and I may be an independent someday, right? But still, like, I will be a left-leaning independent. And part of me doesn't even want to be a part of the two-party system. But Eric, I don't know a lot of independents. You tell me. Do you know a lot of independents who truly are like 50-50? I know a lot of independents that are more partisan than I am. Do you know what I'm saying? They're no.
They say they're independent. Yeah.
I'm an independent. I'm like, I've never heard you say anything that was not partisan to whatever side you were. Like, you're not, okay, you can say you're an independent because it makes you feel better, but you've never said anything that was even close to being down the middle. You vote one way all the time. So my point is, like, there are left-leaning independents, there are right-leaning independents, there are undecideds that, like, they're not really undecided, Eric. Like, they're 98%. Now, again, I consider myself right now, I'm honestly undecided. But my vote doesn't matter because I live in Missouri, right? It does.
Just to be clear, you're undecided between Harris and nobody, right? Or you're not undecided between Harris and Trump.
I've said I'll never vote for Trump because I think I watched him try to overturn the election. So I would never vote for Trump. I'm undecided now between, I think I still might vote for RFK Jr., honestly.
Okay.
I don't even know if he's on the ballot.
I'm glad you mentioned that because he is in the ballot in a bunch of states. Some he's not. But I think that's one of the things to watch on election night that we kind of haven't talked about since RFK Jr. dropping out. By the way, RFK Jr. dropping out and endorsing Trump, if Trump goes on to win, maybe one of the sneaky events to turn the election. Because remember, that happened the day after the DNC ended. Mm-hmm. And Kamala Harris gave a pretty much universally recognized good to great speech on the closing night of the election. Like, even her critics were like, yeah, that was pretty good. And then he does it the next day. And if you watch the polling in the week or two after the convention, she didn't get a bounce. Yeah. Her bounce came after the debate. That's when Harris got a bounce. She did not get a post-convention bounce. Now, maybe she wasn't going to get one anyway, but I think RFK Jr. not just dropping out, but dropping out and forcefully supporting Trump is one of the things that could turn this election. But on the terms of the third-party candidates, that's something to watch on election night. I keep going back to this. What was the difference between 16 and 20? You know, Trump, both are close elections. Trump wins one, he loses one. In 16, roughly 6% of people voted independent, third party, or write-in. In modern times, that's a big percentage. And Trump won because his support was 46%. That was enough when 6% of the vote was third party or independent. Fast forward to 2020, Trump's voting percentage barely budged. He was 46% again. But now he lost. Why? Because the third-party independent write-in vote was 2%. It went from 6% to 2%. And for a long time, one of the things I think that favored Trump was it was way over 6% when RFK was in. RFK himself was getting 6%.
Yeah.
Not to mention Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, or Cornel West, or the Libertarian. But now, since RFK Jr. has dropped out, third-party independent percentages are down around 2 or 3. That, to me, is a positive sign for Harris. She needs to keep that third-party independent vote low because not all of those voters are going to would have otherwise been Harris voters, but most of them would because Jill Stein and Cornel West, they're specifically running to the left of Harris and more specifically on the issue of the war in Israel. And that the uncommitted vote in Michigan, they endorsed Jill Stein because of that issue. And that has to be a major worry for the Harris campaign. And that's something to watch on election night is what percentage are these third-party independent candidates getting? I think that's something that really could swing this.
Okay. My guy Ace, who always comments, thank you, Ace. And John Reibold also. He's commenting on everything. Cardinals, politics, all of that. John Reibold says, why hasn't Joe Biden been on the trail? Okay, couple things. First of all, RFK, I'm telling you, in an election so close, now this is, I don't want to say it's like an underground thing, but I'm telling you, this chronic disease epidemic that's going on, obesity, this is obviously weighing down our healthcare system. And with RFK, it always gets back. People want to think about vaccines and COVID and autism and food allergies and stuff, but like under the big umbrella is this chronic disease obesity epidemic that's destroying our country. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of people that are really behind this, kind of like in the podcast space and on the internet and in groups and people that eat healthy and work out. And I'm telling you, man, like RFK is really the only person talking about this, and him attaching himself to Trump. And now Trump is talking about it. The Democrats never bring it up. I even saw JD Vance the other day. I watched JD Vance on the Theo Vaughn podcast, and it was really good, honestly. JD Vance, whether you like him or not, he came across as a very normal, just a fun dude that you'd like to sit down and drink a beer with, but he brought up Bobby Kennedy. So I don't know. I agree with you. I think that could be the sneaky thing if Trump wins, that we shouldn't overlook that. But I want to go back real quick because you talked about that Harris is going to go and do her speech where Trump gave his speech for January 6th. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but I always thought Trump wasn't going to win because of that. Because I thought, and again, I could be wrong, I thought enough reasonable people in the middle would have said that was a red line that Trump crossed in trying to overturn the election in January 6th. Now, again, I could be wrong. So even though I said earlier with my props here that the cost of life is too expensive, I think the only reason Donald Trump doesn't win in a landslide, in my opinion, is January 6th. So Eric, you tell me this. If I can think that thought, the only reason Donald Trump doesn't win in a landslide is January 6th, then why wouldn't Harris push that in the final weeks? Because again, to me, that's the worst thing Trump's ever done. I've said I thought Trump's first 3 years were pretty good. I didn't think he handled COVID well. Nobody did. I don't like all the crazy stuff that Trump says and does. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, when people do that, was your life better? Was the world safer thing? Like Trump gets the check mark in a lot of those boxes. And this is coming from somebody who's not a Trump guy. So for me, you're in a tough spot because if Trump doesn't do January 6th and try to overturn the election, to me, he wins this easily. So is that also kind of like Kamala's only way to win? I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Well, look, I think it moves a lot of voters, but the ones it's moved, it's already moved, is my point.
Yeah.
Look,
okay.
I agree with that. It comes down to what's the strategy, right? Like, I think if you're going to make the argument about Trump and how dangerous he is, I think you need to, yes, talk about trying to overturn the election January 6th, but you need to expand it beyond that. And you need to talk about the people who have served with him. And Harris is pretty effective at this, and what they say about him and the danger that he can pose going forward. Because January 6th is over, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Trump wins, he's not going to try to steal an election because he will have won. So the point is, what is the danger now, right? And the danger now are the things like what General Mark Milley said about him. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told Bob Woodward he's a fascist to the core. General Mattis, his defense secretary, provided a statement to the Atlantic magazine, said Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. The thing that General Kelly said about Trump being a fascist, about him calling, the people who died in war suckers and losers. General Stanley McChrystal saying he couldn't support him because of his character, said Trump is, quote, immoral and dishonest. Paint the picture of why Trump is such a danger. And the reason that he's such a danger, in my opinion, I think it's true, is because these kinds of people like General Kelly and McMaster and Mattis, they won't be there this time. Mitch McConnell won't be there this time. He's still in the Senate, but he's not the leader. Paul Ryan is not the Speaker of the House. It's Mike Johnson who will do whatever Trump says. The Supreme Court is very conservative and has granted presidents a large amount of immunity now with the decision earlier this year. The checks and balances that were there that constrained Trump. I mean, one of the things Trump has going for him, let's be honest, is he was protected from awful results of his policies and personality by the deep state, by Republicans in his administration and in Congress that held him back time after time from doing what he really wanted to do, including, by the way, trying to steal the election. But it was even more than that. It was in the first 3 years, the pre-COVID years, basically not really following his orders, ignoring them, putting them off. There's story after story about people who have said, we didn't really do what he said. We basically kind of ignored him. We waited until he got distracted and thought about something else. We were able to persuade him through so we were able to lean on him because Trump then he had power, but he hadn't completely taken over the Republican Party yet. He certainly didn't know Washington. It would be completely different this time. Those people would be gone. Any kind of check would be gone. The people that will be there will be the loyalists, the sycophants, the grifters, the people who are in some ways even more dangerous than he is, that have even more extreme views than he does. There would be no one left to check him. That is the argument of what the new Trump term would look like versus, okay, yeah, he tried to steal the election, but that was in the past. I mean, look, we were this close on January 6th to having potentially a massacre in the halls of Congress. I mean, like Ashley Babbitt was killed when she tried to break through the glass. Luckily, that stopped anyone else from doing it. But what if they would have gotten a hold of Nancy Pelosi or AOC or Mike Pence? What if more people would have been killed that day? Like, it was very close. Luckily, thank God it didn't happen. But that's why I'm saying he didn't overturn the election. J.D. Vance says, well, he left on January 20th. Sure, he did eventually, right? Why did he leave? Because he was constrained. He tried everything he could, but enough Republicans stood up to him to stop him. There's no guarantee that will be the case next time. In fact, I would argue it's very unlikely that he will be stopped next time when he tries to do something similar. So if you're going to make the argument, that's how I would make it. But I would focus even more on the economy and on how Harris has ideas that can actually get across the finish line and work in a bipartisan way versus Trump, who is erratic and hasn't really shown that he can do anything in a bipartisan way. And I think she missed some opportunities on that last night in the town hall. I wasn't impressed with her performance overall. It wasn't terrible. And look, Democrats complain, well, she's held to a different standard than Trump. That's true. Like, as she is much better than Trump on the issue. She talks more coherently. She has more policy ideas. She explains herself better. I get it. Is it fair, quote unquote? I don't know, but who cares? It's not about fair. It's about winning the election. So you can complain all you want about how voters should care more about January 6th. They should care more about him trying to overturn the election, that he's held to a different standard, which is totally true. Trump can say and do the most outrageous, crazy stuff. I mean, could you even imagine if Kamala Harris if she would have cut off that town hall after 5 questions and just said, get my Spotify playlist, and she would have just bobbed and weaved up there for 40 minutes with Anderson Cooper, the right they would be going crazy today. With Trump, we just kind of shrug our shoulders. Oh, that's Trump. Like, the guy, he doesn't really give coherent answers to almost anything. So I get it. I get it that it's a double standard. I get it that it's not fair. I get it that people should care more about overturning the election. But at some point, you have to stop complaining and you have to live in the world we live in, right? It's not fair. Sure. Who cares? You got to win. Sometimes the game isn't fair. So, but the point is, you adjust to try to win. Like, if your sports team is playing a game that you root for and the officials aren't giving you the calls and some of those calls are unfair, you can bitch and moan about that, fine. But you got to overcome that. And that's what I'm talking about with her performance at that town hall last night. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't awful. It wasn't as bad as the Trump people say. It was better than things I've seen Trump do, but it wasn't good enough. She missed opportunities. Anderson Cooper asked her, and the audience asked her some pretty basic questions. And she didn't have a good answer. Like, any mistakes you've made, any weaknesses you have. She couldn't really answer that. Your top legislative priority, that's a layup question. She didn't really answer that. On immigration and the wall, like, she gives zero ground. Like, all you have to say is, I've evolved. I've thought about it differently. I've been to the border, and now I do support a wall. I would do it differently than Donald Trump, but I do support it now. It's okay. It's okay to say you've changed your mind. It's okay to admit that Donald Trump does have a nugget of something that is correct in the mountain of, bullshit that he otherwise spews. It's okay to say that. It's okay to admit weakness or something you're not great at. Like, she just is so hesitant to do those things. And I know why. She's afraid of the blowback. She doesn't want to be seen as weak. She probably feels like as a woman, she'll be held to a different standard. And that may be true. But again, it's about appealing to those 5 people. Those 5 people that were on the John King interview you're talking about after the debate, and the people they represent. That's what the game is about. And I don't think her performance last night was good enough, acknowledging that she is held to a different standard.
Yeah, a couple things on that. I agree. I've watched a lot of Kamala interviews and town halls and podcasts lately, and I think she's fine. I think she's okay. She's not transcendent. She's better, obviously, than the coverage she gets from the right, where they say everything is a word salad. But I will say this. There is something to that word salad deal with Kamala where she needs to get to the point more. And this is coming from somebody who I feel like I do this, and it's not a good thing, but it's hard for me to stay on topic, right? Because my brain always goes like, there's a squirrel. And in my head, it's a tangent. So I always go off on a tangent. Like, as I'm saying this, I wanted to go off on a tangent right now, even, and I'm not going to. But like, I think it's important to tell people this is coming from somebody who's not a Trump guy. Because sometimes, if you're a Trump guy, everything Trump does is great. And maybe this isn't fair. But when Trump talks about the weave, right, Trump is able to weave in a way that is funnier. He's almost making a joke of the fact that he's being a politician. And I hate to say it, but it works. It just works. Like, when Kamala gets a question, she always starts with this big story arc. And this is somebody who gives Kamala the benefit of the doubt. I just don't feel like it works as well for Kamala. Say what you want about Donald Trump. He is an extremely effective communicator. He's crazy. He says crazy things. I agree with that, and I disagree with a lot of things he says. But he is very funny. He's an expert at branding and marketing and sound bites and being funny and little quips. Like, he's great at that. And Kamala Harris isn't. And when she does her weave, it's not in the funny way that Trump does it. It's in a way where you can almost see the politician in her brain trying to say something for a focus group, right? Trying to say something that the polls will react well to, which I feel like people said about Hillary Clinton. So that's like, that, from a political standpoint, that's what you don't want to do.
Or pretty much any politician. That's Harris basically does what pretty much any politician does. But what Trump's great strength is he doesn't. Correct. He has zero filter.
And let me say one more thing. This is the tangent I wanted to go on, because you mentioned the comments about Hitler and fascism and whatnot. This is where I feel like we've gotten with Trump. In any other election, that would have been the October surprise. That was like a huge deal. We've heard so many things like this over the last 4 years to 8 years. This was not even a blip on the radar to me, right? And then people on the left were like, this should end the campaign. This should end Trump's campaign. Look what these people are saying. He wanted Hitler's generals. And I'm just like, we've kind of heard things like this for the last 8 years or so. And this is just somebody who tries to look at it down the middle. It kind of felt a little desperate from the left that they thought that this was going to end Trump, right? Like, now at this point, they're throwing everything at the wall because, like, I agree for the most part with what they're saying, just so everybody knows. But, like, we've heard things adjacent to this from everybody around Trump. Every single one, Eric. All these dudes have written books. Bill Maher has every single one of them on. And they all say the same stuff about Trump, and they've said it for the last 4 years. So for these guys 2 weeks out to be like, oh, he's a fascist, I'm like, we've kind of heard that, right? I hate to say it.
I mean, I
It's
think
kind of baked in. It's kind of baked in.
It is baked in. And look, part of it is the Democrats. And you're right, making a big deal about things that aren't a big deal, like the Arnold Palmer penis thing, the McDonald's thing, some of those things that really aren't. And look, it's the boy who cried wolf. Somebody tweeted this the other day. I don't remember who it was, but they basically are making the point of the Democrats are the boy who cried wolf. That doesn't mean there isn't a wolf.
Right.
Like, Trump is dangerous. He does display fascist tendencies. He does love authoritarians and strongmen. He is a threat to our democracy. But when you make everything into an outrage, then nothing is an outrage. And that's part of the problem with the Democrats. And the other thing with Trump is it's hard to quantify exactly what the danger is. Ezra Klein, who writes for the New York Times, had a great podcast that I just listened to yesterday. I want to give him credit because he summed up Trump and better than I've ever heard it before. And he made kind of the point you were making earlier about Harris, is he was saying Trump's greatest strength is that he is uninhibited and he doesn't hold back. And he says the things that people sometimes deep down wish they could say about immigrants, about people they don't like, about anything. And that comes off as authentic. But that's also his great weakness, because he cannot constrain himself. And in the framework of his first term, he had serious people around him in the government, in the White House, in Congress, who could constrain him. And again, they won't be there. They are gone, right? The Mitt Romneys of the world, they're either gone or they've lost power. General Kelly, like, they're not, because Trump's world sees that as a mistake. He sees those people who constrained him from his worst instincts as the problem. Donald Trump Jr. has talked about this, going through the vetting. They're already starting. They're already looking at resumes. They are not going to make that mistake as they see it again, to have these kind of professional, serious people who will push back. It will be the worst of the worst. That's who will be making these decisions and helping Trump run the country again. And I think that's the framework to look at it through if you're making the case against him.
So I kind of disagree with that. Here's why. And I think there will be some people like the Alex Joneses of the world are going to have the president on speed dial. But I do think, and give Trump credit for this, when they talk about the Avengers, the RFK Juniors of the world, the Tulsi Gabbards of the world, Vivek, those are some people that they got some juice. Like, I agree, Eric. I think he's going to have some people that are just 100% loyalists. And you can make the case that J.D. Vance is like that Vivek is like that. They both kiss the ring for sure.
Tulsi Gabbard is like that now, I think.
Yeah. It's funny because like
the modern Tulsi Gabbard,
right.
This version.
It's funny that Tulsi Gabbard, she's like, I'm joining the Republican Party. I was like, didn't you already do that? But again, we can all critique things about Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., God knows. But I do think at their core, those are pretty good people. Like, I don't think those people are going to try to do the worst of things. So I half agree with you there. I think, like, if I'm a person just looking, I'm like, well, man, RFK Jr.'s on Trump's side. Tulsi Gabbard's on Trump's side. I'm not a big Elon Musk guy, but Elon Musk is on Trump's side. I mean, there's a lot of power players there that got some juice, whether you like them or not.
Yeah, but I think those people are in the tank on the side of Trump. The one exception might be RFK, who's kind of like in his own, little world. But look, he did what he had to do. He bent the knee. I don't see him pushing back on Trump, because there is what has happened to people who have pushed back. They've been marginalized or gone from the party, from the administration. So Trump demands absolute loyalty. That's what it comes down to. I think Harris, I want to get back to the town hall for a second, because I do want to give her credit on some things. When she talked about the threat Trump is and General Kelly, that was good. She was ready for that. She does really well on abortion. She got a great answer on that. I think she talks about bipartisanship, warring across the aisle. So not all of her answers are bad, but you can tell on certain questions that might show any kind of perceived weakness, that might allow her to be introspective about how she has changed her mind and why she has changed her mind. She is so unwilling to concede any ground. And
Yes.
the way that plays out is in the kind of word salad rather than just saying the obvious thing. And I will give a lot of credit to Anderson Cooper. I thought he did a great job moderating that town hall, following up and asking her very specific questions and trying to get her to, like, for instance, the wall. She had said Trump's wall was immoral back in the day, right? And then in the border bill she supports, she says she wants to, that bill had hundreds of millions of dollars for the wall. And Anderson Cooper's like, so do you still think the wall is terrible? And she didn't really say, no, I've evolved. I think wall is important. I think that's part of the broad strategy. Like, there are answers there she could have given. For when they asked her if she has made any mistakes, she could have said, look, there were some interviews I did early in the administration. I would like to have those back. I've examined it. I've changed my mind. I've come to this conclusion. And I just think there's more there that would make her more relatable, make her sound like less of a politician. And again, maybe reach those very few voters who are the legitimate undecideds.
All right, we're over an hour. I'll tell you what. You know, Eric, I said that we got shadow banned. I still think something happened. Something happened. But this has been a good live stream. We got 45 people watching right now. We've had like 800 people watching over the last hour. Let me check and get the exact numbers for you. So maybe YouTube unshadow banned us, but also maybe our content wasn't very good for a couple weeks, but I feel like it was the same. So anyway, 814 people have been watching this live stream for the last 61 minutes. So thank you very much, everybody. And hit that like button, hit that subscribe. Eric's moving around, but hey, do you have anything in the notebook that we didn't get to that you need to
I had to plug in before I went dead there. I think I've emptied the notebook. Is there any question or comment you want to respond to? I feel like people left some. I saw some questions.
I was putting a lot of the. Okay, here's one that I actually, from a strategic standpoint, think is interesting. Okay, let me go find it. And I've thought about this for a long time. Okay, it's our guy Errol Spence Jr. He says, which candidate benefits from a turnout election and which candidate hurts from a low turnout? Now, I think, obviously, typically Democrats always benefit from a big turnout and Republicans do not. But I do wonder, and I've brought this up before, I just feel like strategically, if this is truly a 50-50 election, I feel like it strategically benefits Democrats to think they're losing.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
no, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I wonder about that because tell me if you agree with this. Do you agree that if either side does the better job of turning out their voters, they will win? So what I'm saying is, even right now, no matter what you think about the polls and the odds, I think if Democrats do the best job of turning out their voters, Kamala can win. I think if Trump does the best job of turning out their voters or new voters, so I literally think right now that both candidates could win. And just going back to 2016 with Hillary, I think a big part of that, look, she didn't visit the blue wall. You had the Comey stuff. But I think there's some lazy voters. The reliable voters are more Republican. And if everybody thought Hillary Clinton was going to win by 10 points, a lot of people probably didn't vote. And that's why I think it actually benefits Democrats if they feel like they're losing. What do you think?
Yeah, you got to run from behind. I actually think the turnout thing is interesting because for a long time, Republicans benefited from lower turnout. The less engaged voters were more Democrat. But that is switched. And It's switched for several reasons. I think the biggest reason is because, and you saw this in the 2022 midterms, one of the reasons Democrats did so well, for a long time, Republicans tended to do better in midterms because they had the committed voters. That's changed. And a lot of it is the college-educated thing. College-educated voters show up in higher percentages. And as they have become more and more Democrat, that has helped Democrats in these off-year elections, these special elections during the Trump era. Trump's voters now are the people that are marginal, that are less likely to show up. That's why Trump is going on all these podcasts and Twitch streams geared to young men who don't vote or maybe haven't voted, because a lot of them the very casual person in terms of their political content and what they consume, they lean now more Republican than they used to. Not by a huge amount, but I think the shift is there. And so I think actually kind of counterintuitively, I think a huge turnout, if we beat the pretty massive turnout of 2020, which a lot of the projections estimate will be slightly under 2020's turnout, which was very high historically on a percentage basis. But if we have a really big turnout, if we break 2020, I think that's advantage Trump slightly if you have a huge turnout, because of what we talked about earlier, the sense of prices are too high, the country's on the wrong track, we need to do something. So I think that is really something that is interesting to watch, and maybe a change from what we've seen in the past. But in terms of the messaging and running like you're behind, yeah, look, turning out, whichever side turns out their base better probably wins. That's usually how these things work. But I do believe there are undecideds out there. You pointed out earlier, there's a big difference between independents and undecideds. And I think most of the real undecideds, or a lot of them, aren't necessarily independents. They're people that you saw last night at that town hall that the CNN talked to. A lot of them are Republicans. And they are the Nikki Haley voters. They voted for Haley in the primary. They don't like Trump. They are appalled by him trying to steal the election and by what he may do in a second term. And that's why they're not with him. But on policy, they tend to agree more with him than with Harris. And that's why Harris did that swing state tour the other day, where she was in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania all in one day with Liz Cheney. Because Liz Cheney literally is one of those people who doesn't agree with Harris on a ton of stuff, but is concerned, very concerned, obviously, about January 6th and the efforts to overturn the election. And so I think those are the people. A lot of the undecideds, the true undecideds, I think are those people. They are the Nikki Haley voters, the suburban Republican voters who maybe agree more with Trump on the issues overall, but just can't quite stomach him. And that's why I said, those people are already with you on January 6th. Harris needs to sell them that she can work across the aisle, that she can pass big pieces of legislation, that she has a plan that isn't hardcore to the left.
Yeah, you bring up Liz Cheney. I think that's interesting in the sense, like, I don't know that much about Liz Cheney, but I do give her a lot of credit because I think she stood on principles against Donald Trump, and she lost her job because of it. Now, I know more about Dick Cheney, as most people do, and I'm not a Tucker Carlson guy, but I saw a clip where he was speaking at, I think it was that Turning Point event, and that was just a little clip I saw on X, and he said something like, he's always laughing like, ah, he's like, are you telling me that we got Bobby Kennedy Jr.? He comes from the Democrats, and he's a Republican? He's like, and you're going to tell me the Cheneys are now Democrats? He's like, I'll take that trade. And I thought about it, I'm like, I think that is a good trade for the Republicans. And again, I'm just saying, like, big picture, the Kennedy family, RFK Jr., I know he has his problems. And I don't have anything against Liz Cheney, but I don't know about Democrats running on the Cheney name, right? Because Republicans are going to do what they do. They're going to say, oh, that's Dick Cheney. Like, Dick Cheney is also endorsing Kamala Harris. Like, is that good for Democrats? Like, is Dick Cheney popular with anyone?
I think it is good because I think the parties have realigned a lot under Trump. And because of that, those are the voters you now need, are those people who, again, suburban, college educated, voted Republican on economic issues, but just can't get over the danger Trump poses. We saw in the primary how many of them there were. Like, Nikki Haley was getting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of votes in states even after she dropped out of the primary. And pollsters were getting a large percentage of people who voted for her saying, I'm not going to vote for Trump, or I may not vote for Trump. Like, they are there. They are real. They are the Liz Cheneys of the world. Now, that's a big minority, a very small minority in the Republican Party. I want to be clear. That's why Liz Cheney no longer has a job, right? That's why Donald Trump is a nominee and not Nikki Haley. But it's not nobody. It's not an insignificant amount of people. And in terms of the Kennedys, like, okay, let's pump the brakes on the RFK thing a little bit. The Kennedy family, including most of his siblings, completely blasted him for what he did. Like, the Kennedy family has not gone Republican. RFK Jr. is what I like to refer to as an opportunist who realized that Harris and the Democrats want nothing to do with me. I've completely blown that up. And so my only chance to be relevant is if I'm with Donald Trump. Therefore, I'm going to be with Donald Trump. I mean, Kennedy essentially admitted that in the speech where he dropped out. He's like, look, I'm 70 years old. I got 10 years left, maybe, to make a contribution. I still want to be relevant. So let's just be clear about why RFK Jr. did what he did. He didn't just come to some revelation that, Donald Trump is this amazing man who's great for the country. He's looking to, be relevant, which I don't blame him for that, by the way. That's what politicians have done for a very long time. That's fine. He can do whatever he wants to do. But it's not like, the Kennedy clan has now all of a sudden switched allegiances and they're hardcore MAGA.
Okay. But though, like at this point, there's really no Kennedy clan that anybody knows of besides RFK Jr. And I will say this though, and I'm very torn on RFK Jr. because I like a lot of things about him. I didn't like the fact that he hopped on board with Donald Trump. I think he is an opportunist in a way like most politicians are. But at his core, I'm going to get back to the chronic disease, obesity, medical crisis. I do believe that he feels like he can enact change. If he's not going to be president, then in somebody's administration. I do believe that he is genuine when he says that, because otherwise, dude, if you're 70 years old and you got your wife for now, I know he had some issues, but you're in Hollywood, right? Like, you want to go work for what, the National Institutes of Health or whatever he's going to do? Like, if I'm 70 and I wanted to be president and I didn't win the presidency, I'm just going to go live where you live in Southern California and chill. For him, what I'm trying to say is, again, this is me being Kamala. This is my word salad to let you know, I truly believe that RFK Jr., to his core, wants to help this crisis. You're laughing. I'm serious though.
No,
with chronic disease, with obesity, with taking down big pharma, and I think he's genuine when he talks about that.
No, I think he's genuine in that he wants to do that. I totally agree with that. And that's one of the things I like about RFK Jr. is his work on this issue. I'm just saying he's an opportunist in that he's hitching his wagon to Trump in order to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can do that as a private citizen, but he wants to be in government and he wants to have the biggest platform. Again, I don't blame him for that, but I also think we should just call it what it is. I mean, like, let's be honest about it, about why he's doing it. Like, if you remember the reports that he went to the Harris campaign and they rebuffed him, like, as he was considering what to do. I think, both things can be true at the same time. It can be true that he really cares about this issue and he genuinely has a passion for it and he wants to make a difference. It can also be true as he's an opportunist who, knew what he had to do to bend the knee to Trump.
And we can also look back and say that could have been a huge strategic error for Harris not to take that call. Do you got to go? You want to call it? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Ace 583 Rob says, this is a good comment because I did want to mention one last thing. He says America has the best economy and has the best economy in the world since Biden, yet things were definitely higher, but it's better, still the best throughout the world. I think that is one of the things, too, that Harris is making a mistake on. Like, yes, you need to distance yourself from Biden on certain issues, and I think she can do that. But you're never going to run away from being the vice president. You are tied to this administration, no matter what you do. So you might as well try to own the good things. And I feel like she sometimes tries to equivocate so much that she doesn't just stand up and say, hey, you know what? We are doing better than any other economy virtually in the world, way better since COVID. Like, our economy is on fire compared to the rest of the world. They experience similar inflation. It's way down now. Unemployment is still low. The stock market is setting record highs. All of these things are true. And you're going to get tagged with the bad parts of the Biden administration. So you might as well grab the good parts and say, hey, you like your 401k? Check it out. That's Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris is your president, right? As your vice president. You like the fact that unemployment is near historic lows, that our economy is performing better than, most of the rest of the world, that inflation has gone way, way down. Interest rates are now falling. Take-home pay has gone up. Real wages are up in the last couple of years. Basically, almost every economic indicator over the last several years has gotten better and is trending in the right direction, and we are blowing out most of the rest of the world. Like, make that case, because you're going to get tagged with the bad stuff anyway. You might as well embrace the good things that are there. And I think I'm not saying am I nitpicking Harris? Am I being hard on her? Sure. Is it unfair compared to how the media just kind of shrugs its shoulders at Trump's nonsense? Yes. But again, I go back to my point. So what? It's like what Trump said when they told him that a crowd had stormed the Capitol chanting "Hang Mike Pence," and he reportedly said, "So what?" This is a so what moment. You have to play the game with the rules that are in front of you and the refs that are in front of you, meaning the media and the electorate. And I think that is why Harris needs to tighten up some of this stuff, and she just needs to be better than she was. Adriana says my 401k was better 4 years ago. You haven't been invested in an S&P 500 fund over the last 4 years. I don't know who your financial advisor is then, because the stock market is crushing it, record high after record high this year.
Just so you know, Adrianella, she comments a lot, and I think she's an RFK fan. And Adrianella, or Adrian LA, whatever her last name is, she's great, but there's just no way. You need to fire Adrian. You need to fire your financial advisor if that's the case, because there's just no possible way that's true.
Unless you're invested in like True Social or something, or like, were you in GameStop when that was taking off? Because the market has been absolutely incredible for the last really 2 years.
For sure. I mean, inflation sucks, but yes, the stock market through the roof, real estate market through the roof, which sucks for homeowners trying to buy and get into the homeowning game. But for people who own real estate, that's where people kind of look at it. It does seem like since COVID, we've had, two economies, the asset class, and those people are doing really well. Folks that are renting, folks that are paycheck to paycheck, inflation is crushing those folks. So let's end on that. I'll tell you what, Eclectic Scorpio says Harris is terrible for this country. We'll lose freedoms if the DNC continues to control things. Okay. We'll end on that note from Eclectic Scorpio. Eric, thank you as always. Thanks everybody for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. Eric, we had 1,031 people watch this live stream.
Look at
so
that.
The shadow ban,
we're back.
The shadow ban is over, baby. All right. We'll see you. See everybody. Thank you. End stream.